welcome to the Liberty Parenting Panel. We all have kind of a range of parenting styles up here, so hopefully you'll be able to ask some questions that will support your own choices. My name is Kelly Halldorson, and I have 3 children. They are 15, 16, and 18. We travel and live on a bus, and we practice a whole lifestyle of unschooling where we extend it to our parenting, and our kids are free to choose what they want to do and explore things, and we work on focus on our relationship is the focus of our parenting.
Hello, I'm Bob. I have an 8-year-old son, and we send him to a school, but I do teach him a lot of stuff, at home, and he's like, it was some funny stuff like we had a parent-teacher conference, and his math teacher was like, "Oh, and Clark's so cute. He has his imaginary numbers." And I was like, "No, he means a square root of -1." And she was like, "Oh," like she thought it meant like a pet, imaginary friend or something. So I mean, we're teaching him a lot of stuff that's well beyond what he's getting at his school. As far as my philosophy, I don't like. Some people are like, "Oh, you're raising a good libertarian," and I don't like proselytize him just because I think that wouldn't be effective anyway. Even beyond whether that's a good thing to do, is it fair or not? Just, I don't want to force it down him. So obviously, if he asks me questions about, what happens when criminals get caught and how does that work, I give him a straight answer about what the government does. But it's pretty. I try to be pretty neutral about it, and I'll say stuff like, well, some people believe that, there's elections and that's how we, pick the person who's in charge of the country. You know what I mean? So a lot of stuff I say is a technically true statement, but it's, I'm just letting him know what other people think. And then, I guess as far as spanking, I don't do that because my parents, I think my dad hit me once because I did something, and he actually said to me, he goes, "All right, I can ground you for 2 days or I can just hit you." And I was like, "Well, hit me. That's stupid." You know what I mean? And duh. And he was just kind of like, half-hearted because he wasn't. So that was like the one time. And I was the most goody two-shoes kid you've ever seen. I actually didn't think I was ever going to speed. Like that's how much of a, straight-laced conservative law and order kind of kid I was. And so I just know if my parents could raise me to be like that and they never hit me or anything, just, they had standards and I respected them and wanted to then, in other words, if they withdrew their approval of me, that would be devastating when I was growing up. So that was enough, and that's what I'm doing with my son. That, I actually am too harsh. Like if he knocks his glass over, and I'm like, "Oh, come on, Clark," like it'll devastate him. Like, does he think? And I have to say, "Okay, it's okay. I'm not mad." You know what I mean? So there's no way I would need to make something physical. Just the way my relationship with him. So I don't know how other parents are with their kids, but with him, it's just I know that's never something I'm gonna do.
Hello, my name is Alegra, and I'm a stay-at-home mom to 3 girls. They are 7, 4, and 1, and I homeschool them. We kind of do a cross between unschooling and classical education. And my last 2 daughters I also home birthed by myself without any medical assistance. So those are the kind of things that I'm into.
Great. I'm Teresa Warmke, and I have 2 daughters, and they are 15 and 16. And my philosophy is pretty easily summed up in just treating them as people. Ever since they were little babies, just treating them as their own people and respecting their own identities. And part of that is that I did send them to public school when they were younger, and it was before I had really found and understood my own philosophy about liberty. And part of my philosophy of parenting is that I involve them in decisions that affect them. And ever since they've been able to communicate at all with me, I've involved them in decisions. And what school to go to is a huge decision that affects them way more than it affects me. And they want to stay in public school. So every year I ask them, do you want to be unschooled? Do you want to go to a private school? And private schools aren't too much better than public schools in my area. So, but I ask them anyway. And they really like where they are. And so I respect their own choices. So that sums it up pretty much. So.
Hi, my name is John. Apologize for being late. My son had a poo-poo blowout all over my shorts, which, if you're a parent, you understand, comes with the territory. I have a 20-month-old daughter. Her name's Aliana. We have a 20-month-old daughter, my fiance and I, Catherine. And we just had a newborn baby, a 2-month-old. His name's William Lysander. Both of them were natural home births. And we subscribe to the peaceful partnership parenting philosophy. And being a liberty activist for quite some time now, I feel a great responsibility having children, raising them in a manner that's consistent with the philosophy of liberty, teaching them to reject coercion and arbitrary authority, and to have mutual respect. So I think as parents, it's even more important that we live our lives in a manner consistent with the philosophy of liberty, so we don't send mixed messages and inconsistent signals to our children. So that's something that I try to do, and understanding that children really are just a reflection of their parents and their environment. So I think it presents a wonderful opportunity for parents to take a look in the mirror and see if their children are having any type of problems or misbehaving, whatever that means, that oftentimes it's the situation that we put our children in, or maybe they have needs that aren't being fulfilled. So we try to do our best to meet our children's needs by being curious. And I have a little phrase we like to use, curiosity and communication rather than coercion and condemnation. And that really underscores our parenting philosophy.
Well, now I'd like to, if anybody has any questions for anybody up here, come on up.
So, Bob, you kind of implied that it might be morally acceptable for parents to spank children sometimes, especially if they didn't have a naturally goody two-shoes personality, if they were more difficult children. Would you say it was ever morally acceptable for a parent to spank them?
So the question is, what do I think about the morality of spanking? I don't know. To be honest, I haven't thought through it very much. I mean, I just know it's something I'm not going to do. I mean, let me put it this way: if another parent, like if they were raised and that's just what they thought, it's like the same thing with circumcision and stuff. Like, that's not something I would do or anything, but. So, people say, "Oh my gosh, you're mutilating your kid," and sometimes I think that's a bit like that's not how they're thinking of it. You know what I mean? So, it's the same thing with spanking. That in one sense, it is. You listen to Stefan Molyneux, and I agree with the way he talks about it and everything. But I guess it depends what people think of what they're doing, and so I'm kind of hemming and hawing around your head. I guess what I'm saying is I'm not. If there's a parent who spanks their kid, I'm not going to say, "Oh, that person's an evil person," the same way that. In other areas of someone, robbing a bank or, the government officials doing something where I would say, no, that's immoral. There, I don't think it's as big a deal. I would just more, just say, well, you've considered, trying something else or other methods. But that's, to me, it doesn't seem as black and white an issue. Okay.
Would anybody else like to weigh in on that one?
Sure, I'll go ahead. I think it is morally wrong to hit anyone, especially a kid who's defenseless and looking to you as an example. I think it's very wrong no matter what the thinking is behind it. I look at the behavior, and I do try to have compassion for people that don't know about it, but I still think it's morally wrong.
I think, as libertarians, if we base our ethics on the non-aggression principle, that can be consistently and universally applied to any human relationship, whether it's adults and adults or adults and children. So I think it's wrong to strike children, especially those who are unable to defend themselves. But like Bob said, I don't like to pass judgment. I was spanked as a child, and I don't think my parents are evil. They thought that they were doing the right thing. There's just cycles that are implanted within society that it's important for us as liberty-minded individuals to break those cycles. And many people say, well, I was spanked as a kid, and I turned out just fine, and I spank my kid, and he gets straight A's. And so that I respond, well, I often ask, is there anything that you can point to in your adult life that may be a negative effect of the spanking as a child? And often they say no, but I think the fact that someone continues to hit children, passing that on through generation into generation actually is a bad thing and a negative effect of spanking. So I think it's just up to us to talk to people and to start a conversation and to get people to reconsider their core beliefs, and not to do so in a manner that's judgmental or trying to put ourselves in a position higher than them because we engage in peaceful parenting. That always arises defense mechanisms in the person that you're trying to communicate with. So I think it's important to come as a humble person, say, this is my experience, this is the way that I parent, it works for me, have you ever considered alternatives? And just kind of ask questions, maybe engage in a little Socratic method. Works for me.
Oh, go ahead.
So how much does choice occur for each of you in your house for your child? Does choice happen at dinner time? If the kid says oh, I don't want to have that for dinner, or I don't want to take a nap right now, or I don't want to go to the store with you, but I know you have to. How do you have those conversations without coercion coming in? No, you have to take a nap. Because sometimes you can't reason with a child. Well, yeah. Okay.
Okay. I think I'm probably pretty, mainstream on this, and I'm sure John's gonna roll his eyes. But I mean, I'll do stuff like it'll, okay, what do you want to have? But you have to have some kind of meat, and you have to have a vegetable, and I kind of make bargains with them about, all right, well, you got to eat this much, or else, if you want to read that story tonight, that kind of stuff. So it's certainly not, you got to do this or I'm gonna ground you or something. But it's more like bargaining with them to get him to eat vegetable kind of thing. And then if we get home from school and he has homework, I'll say, you got to do that today, but do you want to play first, or do you want to do, your homework and get that out of the way and try to encourage him? So, I mean, I'll give him parameters so he has some kind of choice, but he knows these are the constraints, and I got to do such and such, but I get to choose when. So it's things like that.
I've actually, in our household, the kids have all the choices, as much as I possibly can give them as far as choices go, and they're all teens, so it's pretty easy as far as food goes. They eat what they want. My husband and I try to make sure to provide whatever it is that they want in the house. They don't have to eat when we do. But before we switched into this more freedom approach to our parenting, I did used to do that. We used to have, sit down, you have to eat this much, you have to eat that. And we also, as far as bedtimes go, I think my oldest probably suffered the most from that, where I had made sure he had to go to bed at this time and had to sleep here, and I did let him cry it out. And out of the three of them, he's the one who has the most sleeping problems now as a teenager. So I think that there's ways, I've found that transitioning to this freedom approach to my parenting and allowing my kids the most choices has really grown a respect in our relationship that I didn't have before. And I'm very grateful for that.
You done? You gonna say something?
Yeah, with me, we're kind of mainstream in those kind of approaches. I'm not above making deals with my children, but when we have a lot of choices for our kids, we make sure that they understand why. If they have to eat their vegetables, we talk about all the nutrition. They're aware of what their body needs every day that they need to eat. So if they don't want to eat a certain thing at dinner, they know that they need to pick something else that's going to fulfill the same nutritional requirements. The sleeping thing, it's just for nap times. We don't have structured nap times because we homeschool and we're at home. So whenever they're tired and pass out from playing, as far as late night bedtimes, when they were younger, we did use the cry it out method. It's worked for all three of my children, and they've all been sleep trained within 2 weeks, and they go to bed at 8 o'clock p.m. When they were older, as long as you're in your room and you're quiet, I don't care. If you want to go to bed at 10 o'clock, that's your own business, but that's how we handle it. We just make sure that they have as many choices as they can, and that the choices that they need me to help them assist in making the choices, they understand why I'm forcing them to make these decisions.
We, as far as choices go, we prefer to have, I have a toddler now, so that's my oldest child, 20 months, and she's she's really free and chooses and speaks a lot. I'm sure it's different when you have older children because the range of choices is open that they're capable of doing and the activities that they're capable of engaging in. But on the sleep front, we just go on the baby's cues and on the child's cues. We don't do sleep training or any particular type of schedule. We both work from home, and Catherine's primarily there with the kids during the day, so whenever they get tired, we just put them to sleep, or if we sense that they're getting tired, we rock them to sleep. We all co-sleep as well, so that helps a whole lot. I'm not a big fan of the cry it out method because I think children have a natural physiological expectation to be nurtured and cared for by their parents, and we often inform some of our decisions based on what is in our nature as human beings. And I don't suspect that a tiny child would have felt very comfortable in an older pre-Homo sapien situation where they're left to sleep in a separate room in the cave. I think they'd be very vulnerable to attack. So I think there's something nurturing and comforting and that creates confidence and security in a child's mind whenever they are able to be there with their parent and have their needs met in every way. As far as choices when it comes to like food and stuff, we just don't have unhealthy food in the home. So any choice that our child is going to choose is going to be a healthy food, not inorganic food or GMO, stuff like that. And when it comes to food, we just go based on her cues. Again, if she doesn't want to eat something, she doesn't have to eat it. Kat's a vegetarian, I'm a meat eater. And our toddler's just starting to get into meat. So it's pretty much up to their own cues and their own. We don't do schedules or anything like that. We try to be as laissez-faire as possible and leave open choices. The only quote-unquote rules that we have is we just want to make sure that our child is safe all the time and maybe not being overtly rude or disrespectful to other people in the surroundings. Other than that, we try to just, experiment. Maybe you'll get hurt. Maybe it's a bad choice. As long as it's not something that's going to cause serious injury or serious harm, we pretty much just let it ride and laissez-faire, spontaneous order style.
If I could, she reminded me, that's one thing I do a lot is I tell him why, and I explain the rationale behind the rule, and usually he's okay with that. And, so I have never said because I'm the parent. That would be inconceivable that I would say that. Sometimes if he pushes me into an area, I have to, the other day he was like, tell me all the girls you loved before mommy. And I was like, pfft. And I just said, no, you're too young for that. And he goes, no, I can take it. And so I just had to say just no, and he pushes me about let's tell a story about boyfriends and girlfriends, and I was like, nah, you're not old, and he goes, why can't, what do you think I'm going to do? You think I'm going to get a girl? And he's arguing, and I just kind of had to say, we're not going to keep talking about this, but to give you one specific example of choice versus forcing him to do something, he had joined he was on a basketball team or something, and halfway through this season he just got sick of it and wanted to quit. And so I told him, you don't have to sign up next year if you don't want to, but you have to finish the season because you made a commitment, and the coach needs to put you in the plan around you. And so that was so I forced him to go back to the thing, but also because I knew he probably would like it more, and he was just mad that weekend because he had a bad game or something, and so he did go back to play it later. So it was paternalistic in that sense, but I didn't tell him you have to play basketball because I did as a kid and I want you to be athletic, but I did say you can't just quit halfway through.
Sorry.
This was a really good question, and actually the question about food was kind of one of the easier ones, so I'm going to take it to a different place here, because when my kids were really young, they weren't always able to understand my reasoning when I would tell them why they needed to stop whining and carrying on and having a tantrum in the store. And so when they were really young, that was a really hard age for me as a parent, because I'm the kind of parent that really likes to be able to have, each person take responsibility for themselves and not have to feel responsible and the pressure from other people surrounding us. And John kind of touched on this, but there were some times I was really torn, but I would always tell them, look, if you continue to whine like this in the store, we're going to leave. And yeah, I picked them up. And some people might say that was coercive, but the way I look at it is, when they're older, are they going to understand why I did this? And am I going to feel good about that later? And so that's kind of how I make those decisions, but they're not always easy. Sometimes it is a little bit for convenience or peacefulness around us, and so these are kind of tough choices. And I was really glad when my youngest one turned 3 and at that point they really were able to understand and allow me to persuade them rather than pick them up and carry them out to the car or whatever it was. So that was a relief for me. And I always like to explain why as well, and to the point where, especially my younger daughter will definitely call me on it if I'm being inconsistent with one of my reasons for one of my rules, and that's all good. I really love that. We're treating each other as people and calling each other on our bullshit, and that's all good. But one time about another choice, sometimes my daughter will call me on what we decide to spend money on. They're teenagers now, and I got my piano rebuilt about 4 months ago, and my daughter said, I really don't think that's a good spending of money. And I said, well, what do you want? What do you want instead? Or what do you not have that you want? And she goes, oh, well, there's nothing. I just think it's a waste. And I'm like, well, this is my choice. I'm going to rebuild my piano, and it's, you say you have everything you need, no big deal. And she's like, well, this isn't a democracy. And I said, you're right, it's not a democracy. And when you earn your own money and you don't want to do what I tell you to do with it, then that's your right, And so that was kind of a fun conversation for me, like educating her, no, we don't live in a democracy here. That was that was another kind of less difficult decision. It all got less difficult after they were 3.
I just wanted to share a story of someone that I look to for parenting advice and get inspiration from. I actually used to work with her back at a coffee shop during college before we were both parents, and now she's a libertarian and a peaceful parent, so it's pretty awesome to see her growth as well. But she was talking about, somebody asked her, well, what do you do when your kid is throwing a fit and they don't want to eat what you've prepared for them? Well, she said, well, we only have healthy food in our house, so if our child doesn't want to eat what we prepared for them, then I say, okay, you're welcome to cook your own meal. Go ahead, pick out anything you want. Again, it's all healthy, good things to eat. And let them choose to make their own food. I cooked this for our family. I put my time and energy into this particular meal. And if you don't like it, then you're free and welcome to go cook your own meal. Likewise, she takes the line of reasoning that she's the breadwinner, she's the owner of the home, she pays the electricity bill. So if the kid is saying, no, I don't want to turn my lights out at night, I want to stay up and read all night, or I want to stay up and do A, B, or C, she says, okay, well, that's fine. And she goes and turns the power off on the house. Says, if you have a flashlight or whatever, you're welcome to do that. But I think that there's a good philosophy where we can still allow our children to be free to make their choices, still let them have autonomy and free will. But since we're the people who have the property, or the people that put their time and energy into working to pay a bill or to pay for the food, I don't think it would be wrong necessarily to set limits on those choices, because I try to keep things consistent with the libertarian philosophy and not take things away or have anything be arbitrary. So those are a couple things that people might engage in. Just, if you don't want to eat what we're cooking, then you're welcome to cook your own meal. Let me know if you need help.
Hey guys. So Bob, this means that someone else before your wife actually took an interest in you? I'm joking. Sorry. No, I had to throw some humor in here, but huh? That's true. I can relate. I'm kidding. No, anyway, I wanted to just touch on a couple of things. What's that? No. But you got Tatiana to sing with you, so kudos there. Anyway, I wanted to touch on something that Teresa had mentioned, and then just maybe a question too. But I think I have 4-year-old twin daughters that are turning 5 in September, so I think hopefully you can hear me. And so, I mean, I kind of get what you mean about when they're younger, and you're probably dealing with it a lot, John. Just with the younger kids, the younger they are, the harder it is to really, I kind of look at it as, I hate it, but I mean, you kind of have to coerce at some level. And just to give a simple example, and I don't like it, trust me, I like every step of the way I can minimize that, I do. But if my child was about to crawl into the street, and obviously you could say don't let them crawl in the street, but if they were going to do something where somehow a situation was going to endanger their life, I'm going to intervene and take them out of that. And so, but as you move along, you obviously get to a point, like you said, at 3 or 4, where there's a lot more range of choice they can make. I'm already seeing. And so I think, you have to obviously find your own balance, but you kind of, as you can, expand that out as they get older and older as much as you can. That's kind of what I've found. And I honestly think a lot of the people that would say you can never do any of that probably don't have kids, honestly. But even still, I mean, but that's not to excuse more extreme things. So I'm with John a lot on a lot of the things he said. I mean, you know, keep the environment such that you don't have to do those things as much as you can. Anyway, so my question, though, was more along the lines of, I'm just curious if any of you, or if not, if anybody else here maybe that wants to talk about it, was raised by parents who kind of had a liberty approach to parenting, for lack of a better word, and what your experiences were with that.
I was raised pretty traditionally, and there were a few times my parents said because I said so, and were kind of arbitrary, and there were a few times that my parents were, especially my mom, was quite controlling about expression of feelings, and this is why freedom of expression is probably the most important freedom to me. And so I wasn't raised with a libertarian philosophy. I was raised by parents, and especially my mom, who felt a ton of pressure from people around her and her family to have everyone be happy in her family, even if we weren't, you know. And I have compassion for her. I love her very much, and I understand why. I understand the kind of pressure that is on people to take responsibility for other people in their family, and I don't think it's appropriate. So part of my parenting philosophy is a little bit of a backlash against that. I really encourage my kids to think for themselves. They ask me what we believe as far as religion, and I always turn it right back on them, you know, things like that. I want it to be very open and free to express how you want, and it's funny because they don't really care about it as much as I do, you know. They sometimes say, oh, Mom, you know, clothes aren't important, you know, just get whatever you want to get me or whatever. So anyway, I don't really have the liberty perspective, but part of my own philosophy does come from my own upbringing. And at least I had parents that loved me, and they did spank, especially more of my brothers than me. But you know, I was able to break that cycle, and to me it's really healing to be able to break a cycle and be different and start anew. So that's where I come from on this.
I actually was raised by my mother. She was a single mother, and she's not the least bit libertarian, but she was very respectful of me as an individual. I spent a lot of time with just her. We were friends. She respected me. I didn't have to go to bed at a certain time. I could watch what I wanted. I could eat what I wanted. I really had a tremendous amount of freedom up until about 13, and then she got married, and then my stepfather was, you know, everything changed, and it was much more restrictive. So when I had kids in my early 20s, I thought that my teenage years, where I was off doing drinking and doing drugs and just really screwing up my life, that I kind of blamed it on my mother being so permissive when I was younger. So I started out really pretty strict with my kids. And then as I watched how that didn't work, I kind of came to realize, I think, that it was that the restrictiveness in my teen years that was more of the cause. I was trying to break out and be free and do my own thing, which I had been respected for all those years, and then suddenly something changed. And so I tried to be, so I'm happy that I, at least even though I started pretty strict with my kids, that now they're about to enter adulthood, and they've made some really good, mostly good choices. They certainly make mistakes, and they're not perfect like anybody, but it's kind of fascinating to see how different it is, and which things work and which things don't in my family.
I don't see preventing the child from running into the street by picking them up and moving their person as coercion. We might have different definitions of coercion. To me, coercion is the threat of violence, the presence of violence. So, and then violence, a couple common elements of that definition from different definitions and different sources. There's hitting or striking. There's a element of force, and I think there's an element of an intention to harm or create pain. So I think coercion would certainly be which so many parents say when we have the spanking conversation. Well, I don't spank except if they run out into the road. Then you got to go spank them and make sure they learn that that's not the thing to do. It's unsafe. Or if they keep reaching for that stove, then you got to spank them. And of course, that creates the fear of future violence, which is the reason why they don't run into the road, because they may be afraid of being striked again. Which I think also misses the point, and sometimes children won't learn the real reason not to run in the road is because you could get hit by a car, and maybe when the parent isn't present, they'll say, oh, my parent's not around, so I can't get spanked. Maybe now would be a good time to check out what's on the other side of that road. But I do think you can parent with zero coercion, and because I don't see that as coercion, because of course I do pick up my daughter when she's going towards the road. I did an interview with Stefan Molyneux and asked him what does he say when the parents inevitably say, well, you got to spank to teach them not to run into the road. He said, well, there's this great new invention that maybe you've heard of. It's called a fence. And that just really stuck with me a whole lot. You know, if you're really concerned with a child running out into the road, then place yourself in between the road and your child. Or if your kid has a tendency to reach up and touch the stove, then buy a baby gate and don't allow them in the kitchen while you're cooking on the stove. So I wouldn't necessarily see that as coercion. My parents were totally traditional. They were very lax in the rules and restriction. I was able to go play outside and get in trouble, I wasn't able to get in trouble. I did get in trouble though. Hang out with my friends on the weekends. Some of my other friends weren't able to spend the night at other people's houses, but I was spanked pretty regularly because I got in a lot of trouble in public school. And it definitely shapes your character, especially as an adult. I've been struggling with things that I believe were based on my spanking. I shared a story, a talk on Monday about how recently I had a revelation that spanking may have caused a problem that I had with Catherine. We were split up for a little while, and I did something with an ex-girlfriend that maybe I shouldn't have done. Which I don't think was the worst part about it. The worst part was that I lied to Kat about it. And I believe I've been programmed my entire life by my parents to skirt responsibility, to be afraid of taking responsibility for actions, because I'd come home with a referral or a red card from elementary, and I'd always try to make excuses and say, no, the teacher just has it out for me, or that was Johnny that actually did that, and I was just guilt by association. I'd always make excuses because I was afraid of what was inevitably coming next, which was my father or my mother using physical violence upon me. So I was programmed to avoid taking responsibility because in my mind it was always associated with physical violence being inflicted upon me. So the way our parents raised us certainly shaped them. And I think it's important that we step up as libertarians and we do raise our children in that fashion, because I think there's a phase when kids reach teenage years when they're conscious of more things, and most average teenagers rebel and go so far as to say, I hate you, Mom and Dad. I know I said that to my parents a couple times, but I didn't really hate them. But I've observed with Tracy Ward, who's working her butt off there, she has 2 teenage daughters who were homeschooled and raised in a great way. And they have a wonderful relationship. It's not a rebellion thing. It's my mom's cool, and I want to spend time with my parents, and we laugh and play together. So I think it may be a little more difficult to have the patience and the resolve to not engage in corporal punishment or anything like that. But in the long run, it's going to pay out because you'll have a permanently long-lasting, loving, respectful relationship with your children, and you won't have to go through that rebellion phase. Although I'm wondering if my kids are going to rebel and become Democrats or something like that, or statists. Hopefully not. But if that's what they want to do, hey, that's okay. They'll get the belt if they ever vote Republican or Democrat.
Yeah, just real quick on that. My dad, I don't think he was consciously aware of it. He certainly wouldn't have described it that way, but in terms of how he treated me, it was, very... In other words, you knew exactly what the rules were, and as long as you didn't do something, and the rules all made sense. Like it was a very reasonable set of expectations. And I think maybe he was really disappointed with me 5 times growing up, because it was, but I think that's partly why I was such a goody two shoes. Is it was it made sense. I was oh, okay, why would I? And if I did stray outside of what he thought I should be doing, like I say, the one I shared earlier, one time he was mad at me for something and said, he gave me a choice, so that's kind of interesting. Most people wouldn't have done that. And then also, with the other times, it'd be more he'd be what are you doing? What were you thinking? And I'd just be, I don't know. Yeah, you're right. What, you know what I mean? So it was more, like just think about what you did, and because you so much wanted, when you're little, you kind of want to be your dad. If you're a guy, you want to be your dad when you grow up, kind of thing. And so it was that kind of approach, and I think he just did that because he would tell me stories about his grandfather and what he would do to. It was stuff like the guy was from Ireland. He was like a prize fighter or something, and so he was a tough guy, and he would send the kid out to the shed to go get a tool because if he's working on something. And the story was, if he came back and said, it's not out there, he would beat him. And then if the guy went out and found it, he'd beat him again. You get what I'm saying? So meaning he'd hit the kid even if the thing wasn't there. And then if it was there, then he'd get hit again. So the point was, my dad had heard those stories about his grandfather treating, my dad's dad. And so was aware of that. And I think consciously was saying, I'm not going to do that. But he never talked to me about it. I don't know that I'm just thinking of this now when you ask that question, but certainly in practice, his parenting is the kind of stuff that I'm doing with my son, and I saw his behavior, and I'm just trying to refine it and tweak it and take that philosophy more.
So 2 questions. The first one, in terms of setting up things like chores with children, how do you have to incentivize that or convince them and cajole them into doing it? And second question, which is the one we're more interested in, is in terms of drugs and alcohol, I know you touched on this a little bit, but how do you set boundaries with teenagers and expectations, since as libertarians we're all very much against the drug war and people who have attained the age of reason being able to make informed decisions about what they put in their body. At what point is your child capable of doing that, and how do you deal with the repercussions of that?
Well, I can address this a little bit since I do have the 3 teens. What my husband and I have done since they were young is I did a lot of drugs, and when I was a teenager, you got in a lot of trouble. My husband did as well. We have a lot of friends from that time period. Some of them have died from drug overdoses. Some of them are still drinking all the time. Their lives are a mess. And then the other ones are doing quite well and upstanding citizens, or whatever you want to call. But so what we've done with our kids is we talk to them about all those adults and all of where we are. And we've said, you don't know whether you're going to be somebody that's going to get hooked on something. You have no idea, but you just have to try it to find out. We certainly don't push them to try anything or anything. But that it's an individual thing. So we just try to be very open about what we've done and what the consequences can be and have been for some of our friends. And but also be honest that if you do drugs, it doesn't mean that you're going to be, in the gutter or dead. It could be. There's plenty of people that do things and are just fine. So our experience has been that our kids at this point, knock on wood, who knows, it could change any minute, but they're really just not interested in doing drugs or drinking. There's been times where we've been places and my husband and I are drinking, and the kids have said, "Oh, can I try that and have a sip?" And we've let them. We also know a lot of other. There's a lot of unschoolers that we found that seem to almost put pressure on their kids to do drugs and to get involved in sex, almost as a badge of honor of how open-minded they are. We're not that. We're very honest and it's an individual thing, and you're all going to have to make your own choices. We're going to be here to support you, and we love you, and if you need anything from us, don't hesitate to ask. And so far it's really worked out well. I mean, like I said, the kids aren't perfect, but they do come to us and they tell us about stuff right away. I mean, they're like, "Oh my word, I got to tell you what happened last night," and it's always, there's just an open line of communication.
I don't have kids old enough yet for the chores, although we do encourage Aliana to clean up by singing the classic song, "Clean up, everybody clean." You guys know it. But I don't plan on using incentives or rewards and punishments. I read this great book called Unconditional Parenting by Alfie Kohn. It's Kohn. and he rejects the use of rewards and punishments and incentives. And I think it's important for us to teach the inherent value of an action to a child and encourage them to realize why it's important to have a clean room and why it's a good thing to help with the dishes. Not you should help with the dishes because you're going to be rewarded, or you should help with the dishes because if you don't, you're going to have something taken away from you. I think it distracts from the essence of why it's a good idea to have something that's clean. What I've learned is the best way to do those types of things is to lead by example. And right now our house is a little cluttered and it's messy more often than I'd like it to be, so I think it's going to be difficult for me to come in and say, you need to keep your room clean, even though I raised you in an unclean house your entire life. So I think we ought to do better to lead by example in setting those. And I mean, I can't imagine where a child would have the programming or see what, where they would pick up on having a messy room if their entire life they lived in a house where everything was neat and orderly. I can imagine it could go differently. And a quick story from a friend of mine who does have an older child. I think she's like 8 or 9. One of her chores is to do the dishes, and she started just saying that, it didn't run. The dishes would be clean. Her duty was to empty them out. So instead of emptying them out, she'd hit the cycle again and be like, yeah, they were dirty. And she'd hit it again so she could go and move on to something else. Or she would lie and say they were done, but they weren't done. And one tactic that could be used is like, okay, if you're not going to participate and share the workload that comes in having a family communal unit, because, I reject communism in society, but I can see communism working in a household. It's all mutual ownership and mutual respect, and there's nobody above anyone else. There's no authorities above anyone else. So I could say, okay, fine, if you don't want to participate in the household dishes, then we're just going to keep our dishes over here. These are your dishes. If you refuse to clean them, then you're not going to have anything to eat the next day. I haven't tried it out. I'm interested to experiment with it, but I don't like incentives or rewards and punishments. I think it rejects and distracts from the intrinsic value of why a child ought to do something. And I think leading by example is the best way to demonstrate that. But again, I don't have experience yet, so who knows?
Yeah, I do have kids that are old enough. Unfortunately, when my kids were younger, until about a year ago, my ex-husband insisted on doing all of the chores for all of us, and that wasn't great. I mean, it sounds great. Everyone thinks, oh, great, you have someone to take care of everything for you, but it really wasn't good because it taught our kids that things will always be taken care of for them. So in this past year, it's been a bit of a challenge. I've been taking it slow, I just ask them, hey, could you empty the dishwasher, please? I don't want to set up suddenly a whole lot of structure with them. I give them $10 a week no matter what, so it's not tied to doing their chores. But I do like it when they do say, okay, or, can you help me cook dinner? And then they help and we have fun together. And what I found is that a lot of the time they really like to participate in the family, and it feels much more normal to me now than having one of the parents just do everything for everyone. It feels much more like a community that we have in our household now, and I really like that feeling. But there are times that over and above those kind of things that I ask them to do, sometimes we have special projects going on, and my kids are at that age where they really wish that they could work, but because of the way government has been set up, they really have very limited choices, like babysitting or whatever. Babysitting, the ultimate agorist thing that's still legal, I guess, for kids to do. But they don't really like that. So sometimes I'll ask them, hey, would you want to help me, plant all these vegetables and, do these things, or like a project to build a raised bed or something like that. And I'll give you $20, or, we can make deals like that. Like, we're people, so that's like a special thing. If they say no, I'll either hire someone else or I'll do it myself or whatever. But that's not tied to their allowance, which is separate. And and then about the drug question, kind of like Kelly, my kids really, I've been open with them about drugs. I don't personally do drugs other than alcohol. I've offered them alcohol too. They don't really like it or want it. Unfortunately, with my kids, part of being allowing them to have their own opinions and having respectful discussions and not coercing my own opinions on them, not that works, but part of respecting their own opinions is that they really like a lot more law and order, and they really have idealistic ideas about laws, and so they know drugs are illegal. So like if I ever suggest that if you ever do drugs, just let me know or whatever. Like, well, Mom, that's illegal. Like, and I kind of roll my eyes, and we try to have a discussion about that. But I guess I'm lucky in some ways that they're. I also feel like there's really open communication. I do believe that they really would talk to me if they wanted to, and part of that is I've always believed, and my ex has always believed as well, in letting them suffer, not too horribly sometimes, but letting them suffer their own consequences of their own decisions, rather than trying to shield them too much from that, or trying to put it on something else like spanking instead of whatever the natural consequences of whatever their actions would be. So I think that they know that if they take drugs, they would study the consequences and make thoughtful decisions. And I would never prohibit them from trying it. But I also believe it would be unlikely that they would do so without really being careful. So that's good.
I actually feel like, I actually feel that way too. I think that communication is really the key, and but in open communication, and people talk about. I often hear people say that. Non-judgmental communication. If they come to you, don't be like, oh, don't do that. But I think sometimes, at least my experience has been with my kids, is they will come and they will ask me my opinion, and I think that when they do that, give it to them. There's no reason you can't say, oh, I think that's a bad idea because of such and such. There's a lot of people that I've met that are kind of hesitant to do that. But I know that I'm not being honest with my kids if I'm not giving them all the information and answering all their questions. So I think that it's really, I think the key is really just that, having that communication, having that open door. And I feel as though if my kids are going to be doing drugs or drinking or having sex, or I'd rather hear about it. I'd rather have them feel comfortable enough that they can come talk to me. So if there's an issue, then I can help them through it. I don't want them to just be out there in the world and have nobody to come lean on. I mean, I think that's what I'm there for.
Yeah, just real quickly, my son's only 8, so it's not an issue yet, but what for sure I'm not going to do is demonize that stuff, because for me growing up, I had this image, like there were kids that were on drugs. You know what I mean? Like the kid in my head, oh, that kid's on drugs. And then I didn't even have a sip of alcohol until I got to college. And then when I got there, it was like, whoa, these druggies are really fun, And so, I mean, it would just be the contrast made me, once I dipped my toe in it, I went way overboard in college just because I had been taught things, and I was like, wait a minute, everything I've been told about this stuff is not true. It's not nearly as awful, So what with my kid, obviously I don't want him at a young age doing that kind of stuff, but I would just try to rationally explain why and not, make it look like he's gonna, end his life or something if he has a sip of alcohol. As far as chores and stuff, I agree with my son. We don't want to make it like he's getting paid to take the garbage out kind of thing. I did one time try to do like a special project. I said, hey Clark, how about you come help me rake the leaves for 2 hours for $5? And he goes, well, I only have 3. You get it? So he's not a budding economist, but anyway, that was a cute thing. But it just showed how innocent he was. Like, oh, I get to work with you for 2 hours? Well, and so anyway, so that. You probably don't want to stamp that out and be like, no, the only reason you should want to help somebody is if they pay you for it, So anyway.
Yeah, I just wanted to add about the chores. At our house, if they don't want to do their chores, it's voluntary, so I just start voluntarily doing less of my chores for them. So, sandwiches, you might have to make your own sandwich for lunch then. You don't want to do something for me. So that's just how we do it in our house.
One quick note, my parents were super lax on chores. The only chore that I had to do pretty much was put the dishes up, and I complained and threw my fit about that. And as an adult, I am really lazy when it comes to picking up around the house and stuff, and it's still something that I'm dealing with. There's a lot of tension between me and Kat on that front. And sometimes she says, oh, okay, well, then you could do your own laundry. And I'm like, oh, shit, better start helping a little more, you know. But it is of the utmost importance, I think, to instill the ethic that it is important to be doing these things and to participate, because you'll end up like me and have trouble in your relationship because you're still slacking off in that realm. So it does definitely affect the rest of our lives, what we implant in our children as when they're young.
I know a lot of you are homeschooling or unschooling your children, and I kind of wanted your perspectives on higher education in regards to college, because I went through public school, and you know, I really hated it, but I figured out how it worked, and I was able to get scholarships to go to college. Eventually, though, because tuition rates were going so high, I couldn't really afford it anymore, and I made the decision to work instead and drop out of college, and everything worked out fine. And I think there's a philosophical argument to be made that with the problems associated with college, it could become obsolete to future generations. And I know a lot of you have much younger children, but if every child is an individual and some of them do want to take that path, how is that something that you've thought about long term? Are you going to help them out financially, or are you going to encourage them to pay for things on their own? What's your perspectives on that?
I'm not going to discourage them from going to college. Antonio Beeler actually did a talk on Tuesday, I think, about higher education for homeschooling and unschooling and paths towards getting into that. For one, I would like to create an environment where there isn't this air of, like it's the thing to do to have a piece of paper, and create our own counter economy where, we respect other things and value other things besides a 4-year degree in order to enter into this workforce. I went to college, and the best thing that I learned from it was how to research and how to communicate with other people that had different like minds. I'm not a big fan of the institution of higher education. Most of it is just indoctrination and furthering the indoctrination that happened in high school. Unless you have Professor Bob Murphy, I'm sure it's a different story. I probably won't save up money for a college fund. My father's been given ounces of silver for every birthday. My grandmother gave me money for a college fund, which did go to fund my college. But I'll give our children the choice. If you want to go to an institution of higher learning and we have some savings for that, you can gear it towards that. Or if you're at the age where you can start your own business, then we could use the money to start a seed for an entrepreneurial venture or something like that. Those are my thoughts.
What I tell people right now, because my son's so young, it doesn't really matter, but what I tell people right now that say, like, hey, Dr. Murphy, should I go get a PhD in economics? And I'll say, well, do you want to teach? And if not, then no. What are you thinking? So, and then does that go down to undergrad level? I mean, I don't know. It's true. I think as time keeps passing, having a college degree is less and less important. It's just, I think employers have to get up to speed and just acknowledge reality, because the employers know you can have a perfectly good worker who's not done that. It's going to take time just for the convention to switch, because if it's expected, then everyone's going through the motions. But once it gets to the point where you could get a job without a college degree, then there's no reason to do it anymore. So.
I haven't necessarily discouraged it or encouraged it. It's whatever my kids want to do individually. There's some things that, like my middle son is interested in medicine, so he wants to go to school for nursing to start, and then possibly, go on to, be a doctor or something. So those things require licenses. Those things do require schooling. If my daughter is interested in doing hair, cosmetology, you have to have a license to do it. You have to go through a year of school. That's not college. But so I think that they're pretty practical about, reasons. My oldest son was interested in going to a school for music, but he's been rethinking that because he thinks that he can spend that time learning on his own, and he's already been doing that. So the only benefit he sees would be being able to work with other electronic musicians, so.
I'll add, my kids are getting at that age where they're looking at colleges, and later this summer we're going to go look at some. They're definitely on that track where all they're thinking about is going to college. But your question reminds me, I need to have that talk with them, just like I do about, do you want to unschool or whatever, because I would love it if they, instead of going to college, if they wanted to start their own business, and I have saved up some money for their college education, and if they wanted to start their own business, I would do the same thing that John suggested, help contribute some seed money for that out of the savings that I have for their college. But if they weren't going to start their own business and didn't have a good business plan or didn't want to and just wanted to get a job, I would expect them to start paying rent as soon as they're able to be employed and make that choice instead of going to college. I'm not going to enable freeloaders in my house, just because they're my kids. I don't believe that's being a good parent either. So that's the way I would do it. But thank you for your question. It reminds me that I need to probably talk with them. So.
Okay. We had to wrap it up, and thank you everybody for coming. I think it's been a good discussion.
Beside me, the rain can't reach us here. It's safe and dry. The silence is a season all its own. This morning